So in northern Sri Lanka, there's this airport. Now, on the surface, it looks like a huge symbol of progress, right? A modern gateway, reconnecting a region that seems so much conflict with the rest of the world. But if you look just a little bit closer, you find that the very runway is built on a foundation of some seriously contested history. This is the story of Palali International Airport, and it's really a tale of two things at once: a major step forward and a painful reminder of a past that hasn't been resolved. Okay, let's just dive right in because this really gets to the heart of it all. On the one hand, you've got this idea of a gateway to the future. We're talking economic growth, tourism, connecting the region, all good things. But on the other hand, it's sitting on contested ground, literally. This is a place where the wounds from Sri Lanka's civil war are still very, very raw. And it raises these huge questions about what progress really means and who it's for. All right, so first, let's look at the official story. This is the government's vision, the push to create a national success story, and to do it with a very specific state-controlled plan. To make that vision happen, the first big pushback in 2019 came with a pretty hefty price tag: 2.25 billion Sri Lankan rupees. I mean, that's a serious investment. And the goal was to get the airport ready for regional flights, especially connecting to southern India. But where did all that money come from? And this is where the strategy starts to become crystal clear. Now, India did provide a really important grant, about 300 million rupees. But look at that chart. The vast majority, nearly 87%, was funded directly by the Sri Lankan government itself. And let me tell you, that was no accident. It was a completely deliberate choice to make sure they kept national ownership over this really key strategic asset. And this whole strategy of state control, it's not a one-off. It's absolutely carrying on into the future. You can see the next phase of development, a new terminal building, facility upgrades. It's all set to be funded by the state. The government has been very clear. They are not bringing in private partners. They're determined to guide this airport's growth entirely on their own terms. But the money story, as clear as it might seem, is really only one side of the coin here. To get the full picture of Palajoli, you have to rewind the clock. You have to look at the land itself. And that is a story of expansion, of displacement, and of a community that is still fighting for its history. So the airport actually started way back in World War II as a small airfield built by the British. But the really critical moment, the one that changes everything, comes in 1985. In the middle of the Civil War, the Sri Lankan army forcibly takes over an extra 646 acres of land surrounding the airfield. And by the 1990s, the whole area is declared a high-security zone, and every single resident is forced to leave. And you have to understand, this was not just empty land. This expansion directly impacted 643 original Tamil families, landowners whose entire lives and ancestral properties were just upended. This number, 643, is so important for understanding the very real human cost of this airport's growth. So now, all these years after the war, the impact of that displacement has just fractured the community. The majority of them, 538 families, they eventually took a compensation package from the government. But a pretty significant group, almost 100 families, refused. They said no. For them, it's not about the money. They want their land back, their ancestral land. And that has turned this into an ongoing fight for justice and for their heritage. Okay, so now let's zoom out a bit, because all of these decisions about Palali, how it gets funded, who gets to control it, none of this is happening in a vacuum. It's all part of a much larger, much more careful geopolitical dance that Sri Lanka is doing on the world stage. This quote right here gets to the very heart of why the government is being so cautious. See, Sri Lanka is basically haunted by the financial disaster of another project, the Matala Airport. That was another international airport that just failed. It couldn't attract flights, and now it needs huge government subsidies just to stay open. So with Palali, the #1 goal is to avoid repeating that mistake at all costs. And check this out. This perfectly shows how Sri Lanka's strategy has changed over time. Way back in 2011, they flat out rejected a massive $100 million loan from India for this very airport. They were worried it would create too much debt. But then in 2019, they accepted a much smaller grant of 300 million rupees. So what's the difference? A grant doesn't have to be paid back. It's a really smart, nuanced approach. They're welcoming help from partners, but they're strictly avoiding any kind of debt. So the takeaway here is that every single policy decision they make just reinforces this one idea: absolute state control. There's going to be no public-private partnership running things. The new terminal, 100% state-funded. And they're even restricting who can do the feasibility study for the runway extension just to avoid any conflicts of interest. Sovereignty is the name of the game, plain and simple. So, what do we do with all this? You have these two incredibly powerful competing stories. On one side, you have this pragmatic story of economic development and national strategy. On the other, this story of deep historical grievance and a fight for justice. The future of Pali Airport is happening right at the intersection of those two worlds. Ultimately, this airport has become more than just infrastructure. It's like a barometer for peace. Its real success isn't going to be measured in passenger numbers or profit margins. No, it's going to be measured by whether the government can balance its big ambitions for the future with the very real need to heal the wounds of the past. It's a test, really, of whether development and reconciliation can actually move forward together. And that really just leaves us with this one final critical question. Can this runway, which is designed to connect Sri Lanka to the whole world, truly be a success if, for some of its own people, it represents a permanent disconnection from their homes, from their history, and from their own past? That's the complex reality of the Palali International Airport.